Hey everybody. Today I am wanting to talk about the door slam, the INTJ door slam. So we hear about it a lot, and I want to speak to it as a personal side of things because it actually occurred for me just recently. And this was an interesting topic to cover because it is something that was very salient to me, but at the same time, it's covered in all of the other difficult ways of articulating emotions. So, I want to talk to door slamming in potentially a different way. So, I want to equate it for an INTJ more as a write off. Now, I'm going to try and explain both sides. But with, say, a door slam, I would argue for potentially other folks that don't have issues with trying to process emotions and make sense of things, or potentially have a different way of interpreting things. A door slam could be simply, you know, shutting things down immediately with negativity, anger, that kind of impulsiveness that comes from the heat of a moment. And I want to argue, I don't know why I'm having to make this into a legal question, but maybe that's my way of handling it. Love to hear other people's point of view, but uh, for an INTJ, usually if we're ever at a point where we are faced with a door slam situation, it is the player, the other individual in this situation is usually someone near and dear or has been vetted and proved early on, and then through the course of life happening, the notice of certain types of behaviors that are being negative and destructive to me or that person. But in this case, it's for me. And that is something that, unfortunately, I chose to be in the review mindset for too long. And that causes a lot of, you're really weighing the larger step, because once that person is in your life, there's that social fabric that is all tied together. And in my case, I'll go into my case a little bit more later, but for myself, when you have started noticing these types of negative situations in someone that you've already vetted and has become a primary person in your life, you, instead of being able to enjoy the relationship from a first party kind of observation, so living in that moment and enjoying and feeling all the sensing and the creation of those moments together, you move into more of a third party or a third person observation, where events that are happening in your everyday are being looked at from the observing side of things, where you're using it to put it into a file folder in your mind that will be used, and you don't know when, but it's automatic to keep that in your mind and use the good, bad, neutral of ongoing just conversations and simply even, gestures and that type of thing, the rudimentary parts of everyday life that you stay in third person, because third person is evaluation, where you have moved from progressing a person that you're close with in a shared experience. Instead, you're moving into okay, we're in warning time, and you stay in that warning time for as long as you've determined you want to stay. So for myself personally, and again, lots of other primary relationships don't have to end in door slams, but for mine, I needed to. And I will get into that a little bit later. But the reason why, it just came to me today, actually, the idea of this is a write-off rather than a door slam. The idea of a write-off is that you have weighed everything in that situation, and the assets, the liabilities, all of those things, and you have determined it is not feasible or worth going forward. So you can, write-offs, I'm not going into the accounting side of things. This is actually just where, for myself personally, I feel a write-off is something where you have looked at every angle, you've sourced every side of things, you've made multiple angles be allowed to be explored, and you have chosen that you would rather leave whatever is on that table, even if it's a deficit, that it is more worth not having to engage with that individual. So while it sounds, I guess this sounds very almost litigious or fiscal, it really isn't. This is sometimes the way I have to make sense of things in order to deal with a lot of the emotional slurry that comes up from having something that is very primary go and make a real decision to not be around that person. So as I've mentioned in other videos, had relationships before, and even like always it's two people in a relationship, and it's things work out, don't work out, and usually I will find that there is enough value, I guess, to have a positive, or as positive as you can get, exit from a relationship, either if it's to make sure that, life doesn't get jolted and relationships are kind of managed, and the healing process can begin a little bit easier. But in this situation that I have, or that I'm speaking to on this, for me personally, there was I saw no way to make it where there is a possibility for any sort of interaction again. And in this situation, there is financial sides tied with quite a bit of money. It's life, right? Like we're intermingled. Once we start trusting someone, there's a lot of vulnerability, and you have to know that when you weighed that vulnerability back then, you weighed for the worst possible situation. This could be the worst possible situation, but you never know. But the point is that you get to a point too that mental health is much more valuable than trying to continue to stay on third-party observation. The value of that individual in my life wasn't worth it. I have a tough time trying to talk like this because it's very personal, but I did feel like this message needed to get out. So in this situation, it was very it was very quick. So this happened where it was a finite event, and we had, gone into a discussion about a bunch of, main things that we had to check off. And it's usually like an itinerary kind of thing, like regarding just parts of our lives that were like basically like business associates at this point. But at this point too, there had been enough of the yelling towards me and the lack of constructive conversation. And I noticed that in that split second, I took all of that information that was happening in this current situation, and it felt like it was like the files in my brain opened, where all of that information that I had been pulling for years and, putting into my mind, having no idea why it was important, but it was part of that third party observation that had taken over because there wasn't enough of the first party observations that I was feeling safe enough to allow myself into that kind of mindset. Then it was very clear, because there was a certain point where I was finding myself getting talked over, and I had definitely had allowed that for a long time because I was looking at the larger picture, and it wasn't like a snap moment. It was literally in the back of my brain where it's like, no, you have to talk about this. And I actually I was on my way to leave from this conversation because I was getting upset. And one thing I like to do is just create space, and for myself, safe space. And instead I realized it's like, no, and I told him that I am talking about this. This is something that's important, and was ready for that confrontation. Didn't feel upset. And yeah, it was, what I noticed was, even though the material in the conversation was, still being discussed, and it wasn't, a full shutdown, what I really noticed when I moved into this first person, where I almost got sucked in by my brain saying, no, you're standing up for this. This is like, and I don't usually have that mindset in this particular relationship. And from there, I definitely noticed that it was, I pulled I can't say it enough. It felt like the book opened, and there was all the things that needed to weigh into the decision that I wasn't even thinking when I'm having this conversation with him, but I eventually kind of pulled it all together. So what I found fascinating, and yes, I will get into the rest of it, but what I found fascinating about this is how quick our brains are working and how quick it is accessing this information, and how quick it identified this is a key time, and how I noticed the reason why I identified it as a key time is I was noticing, I'm going to read my notes because I actually had to write some of this down to remember. The situation, I actually have it written down as it was almost like a holy grail, where the negative body language that was coming off of him, the negative vocal inflection, which even though was somewhat unfortunately used to, and by no means am I some sort of person to look up to on standing up for yourself, which is ironically like that's something that I definitely work with as an INTJ female. The flat regard for my care and his disinterest, or actually I don't even know if it was disinterest, but the lack of wanting, or the bridge building, where usually in the heat of the moment you're still like the larger picture is being looked at, where it's like, look, I really don't want to cause issues or hurt, that type of thing. Unfortunately, I don't have examples for this from my personal experience on this one, but the lack of interest on their end, or on his end, in the value of what I am and my extension of me with, the life around me as well, wasn't even, I couldn't sense it in what he was mentioning to me. And right then, I decided I was going to then double down, because I don't have any rationale for it. This is not something that I was planning for on any level. I decided to bring up something that was really personal to me, and say it in a way that, so I brought up something about like our actual physical relationship, and instead what happened was a total invalidation and dismissal of that, which is very sensitive to a human in general that's in, primary intimate partnership, that you've invested finances, time, and way too many brain cells, which is the thing that is the hardest for, I think, a lot of us INTJs, because we're trying to make sense of our own emotions, let alone what our emotions are tied to convoluted relational stuff. And that at that moment, when I heard the dismissal of basically me, I heard through all of the stuff that the yelling and the negative ways that I had been okay with allowing myself to stay in. And instead, he saw me somewhat be more, I don't know what he saw, actually. I would assume he saw something that was clear enough to him that he wanted to say very large statements that he can't go back from. So in this case, it was, why don't we just sell our house and take a loss and walk away? And for the most part, for me, I'm pretty pragmatic about what my financial safety somewhat is, growing up with not a lot of money. And at this exact point, I just realized it's like, no, sell it. Like, that's it. We're listing right now. And I remember even looking for my sunglasses on the way out because I wasn't preparing for this conversation to ever happen. And couldn't find them, and then making the decision, who cares? Like, literally just, I don't want to be around here one more second. And thinking to myself as I open the door, I'm going to actually slam it this time. I never slam doors. And so the proverbial became the literal. And if you have questions, feel free to, send them to me, because I recognize this is very convoluted, but I also recognize that it's something that it'd be interesting to hear if other people have, or hear what their door slam feels like if they've had that. Because it's easy for us to come across as, yeah, we slam the door, because a lot of times we do. If it comes to a person that is, only been in as an association for a couple of days, and we can do a workaround around them, yeah, we'll just do the nice slow fade or whatever. Like, people can cut off relationships easily in those times. It's when it gets into that difficult part where all of a sudden our analytical side is really getting fired up more and more, because it is speaking to a lot more than just the, ooey gooey, confusion and wonderfulness of why you get into a relationship to begin with. It's something that is, I found for myself, I guess I should end with this. I left and I was, crying in my car on the way home. And it wasn't a crying because it's over and I'm so sad. It was a crying of just, it was just pure feeling. And that feeling didn't have a name, but it felt really amazing to get it out. And when I got home, I realized the calm reserve that I had, because I had made this right decision, and it made it it was something that I felt very comfortable in, which I don't always, I second guess a lot of emotional decisions. And then, wrote a message saying, because I never told him before that I wasn't going to speak to him again. And I just told him, list the house, I'm never speaking to you again. Send the proceeds of the sale once it's completed. And it gave me this amazing feeling of having a black and white question mark or a boundary for myself. So there's no movement from that. I've said to myself, like, nothing can play in to change this decision. And there's something very liberating, I guess, regarding that. It's, I guess, when everybody else is like, I'm done, I guess that's kind of the feeling. Even when you're not done, even like before, it'd be like, those feelings are still there. However, you've given yourself, that's it. Like, it's like, it removes, it allows, actually, and this is, I'd like to hear what other people have to say. It allows us to go back into almost being like Spock again, where we don't have to dabble in the stuff that makes us human. We get to go back to the easy way where it's like, I don't have to look at that stuff because I just made a decision for myself. Yes, it's like a 0 and 1 where that's it. It's wrapped up, and whatever the chips fall, wherever they are, it doesn't matter because there's no conversation, and it's a definite new feeling for me. So anyways, this is a very long video again, but sometimes talking about the actual stuff that comes up in my own life tends to make it a little bit more wordy and running around in circles to get to the actual point. So, as always, love your comments. I love the community and that is in our comments group, and always love to hear video requests, and hopefully we'll be putting out another video somewhat shortly.